So, welcome and hello to you all from very varied parts of the world. It's wonderful that you could make it today, to today's session, and we hope that you will find it useful. I thought we would just start by giving you a bit of background as to how the webinar came about. Myself and Nerea and Kay are all members of the Crisis, Disaster and Trauma section of the BPS. And last year, in one of our Zoom committee meetings, we decided we wanted, as a committee, to show our appreciation and support of healthcare professionals. And so we came up with the idea of doing this session, to which Kay and Nerea and myself said we would organise. You'll find that the content of it is actually quite varied, but that's because the three of us come from different backgrounds and experiences, but we'll discuss those shortly when we introduce ourselves. We also advertise quite widely, as you can see from the people that are now joining us. So we weren't really sure the particular professional backgrounds that you all came from. So again, we've tried to cover as much as we can in the webinar to accommodate this. We're also fully aware that we're not going to be able to discuss everything that may help to support you and your staff through these difficult times and beyond. But we do hope that in the short time we have together, we'll be able to raise awareness and also prompt some thought and reflection, and hopefully an interest in finding out more about what we discussed today. We know that the pandemic has caused a huge level of stress and anxiety in those caring at the moment. And that's actually been shown very recently in a study out of King's College, which highlighted the problem. But we're also aware that for a long time, many healthcare professionals have been struggling way before COVID had arrived. And unfortunately, the pandemic has exacerbated things and amplified the situation. So hence the title of the webinar is not just in COVID times, it's also in non-COVID times. So who are we? So I'd like to first of all introduce you to Kay and Nerea, and each of us will give you a little bit of our background, and so you'll understand then more about our approach to today. So Kay.
Hello, I'm a psychology researcher, well, an apprentice one. I'm currently doing a PhD, and my focus is response to trauma and extreme events. But I'm really here because I have friends who are nurses, and listening to them coping with their work through the COVID crisis, I realised that understanding normal human responses to extreme events could be really helpful right now. So that's why I really wanted to get involved. So my focus is trauma.
Well, hello everybody. I am Nerea. As you can see, I'm Spanish, so bear with me during the seminar because of pronunciation and so on. I am clinical and counseling psychologist. Nowadays, I'm working in a community team with adults. I have been working with children, with families. I'm also family therapist. And I have been involved in several well-being groups, support groups in different organizations within my job. And I wanted to add a bit of my experience working with different people in different professions. And Kate and Kay came with the idea, and it was great to be here and join.
Thank you both. I'm Kate Upton, and I've spent most of my nursing career actually working in the community. And at the beginning, I actually, really enjoyed it and felt very energised and happy with it. But over time, I did start to struggle, and every day almost became a day where I felt like I had Sunday blues. I really was not looking forward to the day ahead. And I did really struggle with it, and to the point where, sadly, I did leave the nursing in the community and went on to lecture at the University of Birmingham, where I was for a good 13 or 14 years. It was actually where I did my nursing degree. And from that point, I then did my master's in research, health research, to which I started to look at compassion fatigue and self-compassion in acute care nurses. And I guess that's where my sort of more academic side of wanting to sort of look into the well-being of healthcare professionals started. And that's progressed into a PhD, which I'm pursuing at the moment. So that's me. So if we could now have a quick overview of the session. So we're actually going to firstly start with a mindful moment led by Nerea. And then we'll run through the key objectives of the webinar, followed by Kay, who will explain the key concepts such as burnout and secondary traumatic stress. And she'll also she'll also discuss a case study of Gina, and that will hopefully put the concepts into context for you. I'll then look at compassion fatigue and similarly look at a case study to put things into context. Then we'll look at strategies to buffer the effects of caring and look at those at both an individual and organisational level. And Nerea will look at them from an individual level, and I will look at them from an organisational point of view. And then I will continue and look at compassionate, authentic leadership, along with the concept of thriving at work. During the session, you'll actually see that we've got a few questions that we would love you to have a little think about and answer if you wanted to. So if you wanted to pop anything into the chat box, that would be marvellous. If you as individuals have any questions, if you could pop those into the Q&A, that would be great. And also any feedback we'd be very grateful for, and you can pop that into the chat as well. So if we now go on to Nerea, and she will host a mindful moment. Thank you, Nerea.
Thank you, Kate. I would like to add as well that we have a Twitter account, which is BPS Crisis and Trauma. I just posted in Twitter that if you want to share resources or say anything about the webinar or participate or whatever, just you have that option available, okay? And more than welcome to see anything that you have to say. So we want that you give us a moment and start with a breathing space for all of us. Maybe some of you are cooking, some of you are multitasking at the same time. Many of us, we have done many webinars and we are used to do many things at the same time. But I will really ask you and encourage you just to join for 10 minutes. It's a mindfulness exercise. If you are not familiar with it, it's okay. Just try it if you want. And if not, well, we will continue in about 10 minutes, okay? So I don't know where you are or what's your setting around, but please, if you can, sit in a comfortable sitting position with both feet on the ground. And allow yourself to feel centered in the chair. No legs or arms crossed, please. And make sure that your back is upright, not too tight, and relaxed. Maybe you can place the palms of your hands on your legs or in contact with your belly. If you're new to mindfulness, if you have never done this kind of exercise, I would really recommend you place one of the hands, the right hand, for example, in your belly. So when you are breathing, you can feel your belly expand and relax with inhalation and exhalation. But that's depend on you and what works for you. Now, I want that you close your eyes or keep them open with a soft gaze. With time, you might wish to try this exercise with your eyes open if you're at work or in a public situation. Now, let's begin. I want that you take a couple of breaths to let out any tension in your own time. Breathe in and breathe out. When you finish, make no effort to control the breath. Simply breathe naturally. It does not matter if your breathing is slow or fast, deep or swallow. It is what it is. It's something that we all do. Now, focus your attention on the breath and how the body moves with its inhalation and exhalation. Bring all your attention to the physical act of breathing. Notice the movement of your body as you breathe. Start to notice the breath as it enters your body through your nose maybe your mouth. Go to your lungs, diaphragm, and later your belly. Observe it. Simply focus your attention on your breath without controlling its pace or intensity. Be aware of it. If your mind wanders, return your focus back to your breath. Breathe in and notice how your belly and diaphragm expand. Breathe out and notice how they relax. Notice the breathing and start to relax your body. Try to notice the shape of your body, the weight, and let yourself relax and become curious about your body seated in the chair or sofa, maybe lying on the floor. The sensations it experiences, the touch, the connection of your feet with the floor, the body with the chair, and relax any area of tightness or tension. Just breathe. Tune into your breath. Feel the natural flow of breath in and out. You don't need to do anything to your breath. Not long, not short, just natural. Notice where you feel your breath in your body. It might be in your abdomen, your chest, throat, or maybe your nostrils. See if you can feel the sensations of breath, one breath at a time. When one breath ends, the next breath begins. And please, be kind to your wandering mind. Now, as you do this, you might notice that your mind might start to wander. You might start thinking about other things. And if this happens, it's not a problem. It's okay. It's very natural. Just notice that your mind has wandered. Maybe you can label it. If you have any thought, label just thinking. If it wanders, just wandering. You can label this in your head softly. Then, gently redirect your attention right back to the breathing. Notice your breath in silence. From time to time, you'll get lost in thoughts. Then, return to your breath. Breathe in and breathe out. Now, I want that you start to scan your body, from feet to head, as if you will be inside of a scan machine. If you feel any discomfort or in any pain, mentally soften the area as if you will be placing a warm towel on it. And bring some compassion to the area. Tell yourself, there is a little pain or discomfort there, and it's okay. Maybe some itchiness. Let's start. Notice your feet, the sensations of your feet touching the floor. Weight, pressure, vibration, maybe heat on the floor. Next, let's check your legs. Maybe you feel the chair, any pressure, any heaviness, lightness. Check your hips and your belly. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Feel how it expands with each breathing. Maybe you notice more the contact with the chair or the contact of the clothes against your body. Notice your back against the chair. If there is any itchiness, discomfort, just let it go. Breathe on it. Notice your hands, Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Check your arms. Do you feel any sensation in your arms? Maybe soreness? And let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Feel how the air goes in and out through them. Relax. Soften your jaw and let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then, I want you to notice your whole body present. And be gentle. And please bring gratitude to your body for all the tension that it accumulates and holds on to through the day. Maybe even you can extend gratitude to yourself, all the effort that you are doing daily, everything that's happening to all of us. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best as you can. And when you are ready, start to notice the sounds that might surround you. Any smells, change of temperature, change of light. I still hope that it's sunny all around. And start to move or wiggle your toes and your fingers. And if you feel ready, open your eyes and come back to this webinar. If you have any comments or anything that you would like to share, you can put it in the chat, you can put it in Twitter, you can put whatever you want. And now we are going to come back to the presentation, and maybe we are going to be changing the pace of the exercise. Thank you all that you try, if you were able to try it. And this is like going to the gym, one day at a time. There is nothing perfect, okay? Be gentle to yourself. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Nerea. Thank you. So, while you're all feeling nice and relaxed, I would like to now go through some of the objectives with you. So over the next 90 minutes, we'll highlight the effects of caring on the physical and emotional well-being of carers, as well as the factors that contribute to carers becoming stressed and overwhelmed. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet that will fix everything, but we hope to highlight some of the strategies that we feel can best help you and other healthcare professionals and their ability to thrive at work and support their health and well-being. We'll also discuss why compassionate, authentic leadership is so important and what thriving at work is and how it can benefit not only you as individuals, but also organisations and ultimately patients. So I'd like to now pass you over to Kay, who will discuss some of the key concepts. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you. I'm loving the comments that are coming up in the chat. I'm really pleased to see that people enjoyed that. So we made the booking of this webinar open to the public, and we don't know exactly who's out there. So this isn't going to be a massively in-depth look at the academic concepts. I just want to introduce some of the psychological concepts that could be relevant to people who are trying to stay resilient in stressful times. And as Kate mentioned, I'll use a case study to highlight how that might apply. Compassion fatigue and burnout are not responses to trauma, but my own research has showed that they can actually be quite important alongside trauma responses. The bottom line here is that trauma psychology recognises that we all have a normal distress response to extreme events, but that may not feel normal to you if you're experiencing it. It could feel quite alarming. So I will briefly go through traumatic stress, PTSD, complex PTSD, secondary traumatic stress. I will say less on moral injury, which is distress from being involved in activities that go against your ethical code. But I think from some of the stuff that's coming out in the press at the moment about healthcare staff's experiences with COVID, that may well be relevant, but there isn't really any research on that yet. I'm just going to quickly drop a link in the chat, which is to a moral injury conference that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Then after my slides, Nerea and Kate will be highlighting what's been learned from research and from practice about helping people cope with all of these issues that I'll highlight. So I can go to the next slide. So this is a real person with their name changed, and the experiences relate more to the first wave of COVID for a hospital nurse. And I'd be really interested if you want to contribute anything in the chat, if any of this sounds familiar to you. And I'll give you fair warning that there is a reference in here to suicidal thoughts. So Gina is a senior nurse in her 50s who has 20 years experience of working on surgical wards. She's a team leader who strives to look after her more junior colleagues. She does have a happy home life, although she is sandwich generation with elderly parents and grandchildren that all depend on her. And that's important for support, to know that there's a happy home life. When the number of COVID cases started to rise sharply, Gina was redeployed to ICU, away from her team and away from what she specialises in. She didn't have that much supervision, and she knew she had a lot to learn, and she spent a lot of her time outside of her shifts learning as much as she could so that she could keep up. And she said that she felt the stress of keeping her patients alive. This was a sentence she used a lot, with little knowledge of COVID, which no one had, and little knowledge of intensive care. But she did her best, as she always does, but she felt like there wasn't really much checking up on her or people asking her how she was doing. Everyone was trying to do their best in difficult circumstances. Plus her manager was shielding and was less aware of working conditions. I think the fact that she wasn't seeing her teammates was difficult, but she was also hearing snippets, one of which really disturbed her. A junior nurse shared with another colleague that she'd noticed herself thinking on her commute that she would rather drive into a tree than go on the ward today. And not being able to contact that colleague and support them was actually a source of stress for Gina too. Gina got to the point where she needed to take some time out. Her GP signed her off for a couple of weeks. She spent some time talking to friends and family, and what kept coming up was that day, a single day when she was left in charge of 2 COVID patients with no supervision, and there was no one available. And she just felt she was letting her patients down because she didn't necessarily know what to do to keep them alive. And she kept that the feelings from that day just kept returning to her. So when Gina was referred to a clinical psychologist at work, she was told to focus on positives, that her hospital was doing really, really well. But she was told that she was suffering from anxiety. When the second wave of COVID started to crest, Gina started to feel really anxious about her colleagues being deployed away from her again. She says there's more training now available, but she really doesn't want to go back to that ward. And so thank you for the comment that this is relatable. So we'll move on to the next slide. So I think that, to me, Gina's professional competence was one of the things that was concerning her. And I think there's a link there with moral injury, that she felt like she wasn't doing the right thing necessarily for her patients. And the fact that she keeps reliving that bad day is quite significant in terms of experience of trauma. The fact that her workplace colleagues were out of her reach as well, and that's a big source of support, that's important to dealing with these issues. So I'll go on to the next slide and just start to work through very briefly the concept. So with traumatic stress, so both traumatic stress and what it could develop into, but doesn't necessarily develop into, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. The stressor for that is, for both things, is actual or real threat of harm or death, either to the self or to somebody else. So both traumatic stress and PTSD could come from that. They're a normal stress reaction. And if you want to go to the next slide. For it to become a diagnosis of PTSD, you're looking at these different symptom clusters, which all would need to be represented. But even if just 1 or 2 of them is represented, then that might be indicating there's some traumatic stress. And these symptom groups are what the King's College London study that was just published by Greenberg would have been using to measure PTSD. And from that, they concluded that with intensive care staff, 40% of 709 staff had met the PTSD criteria. If we think about Gina, her reliving of that day would constitute intrusion. Her negative feelings of distress and guilt and horror account for the negative emotions cluster. In terms of avoidance, the fact that she said she really doesn't want to go back to ITU. It doesn't mean that Gina would be diagnosed with PTSD, but it does indicate that there's some traumatic stress present. PTSD diagnosis would only happen if it was longer lasting or if it was really affecting life or work. And I would argue it is actually here, but we don't know how many other things are represented. Gina may well be resilient enough with her family and friends around her that she doesn't have a lasting effect, so it's just some temporary traumatic stress. So, you know, there's some difference between a normal response to extreme events and it becoming a disorder. One of the concerns for me was that Gina was told that she was suffering from anxiety, and I just think we have to acknowledge that her normal response to trauma would, in that case, perhaps be internalized as a mental health problem, and I think that might make her feel that it's her fault rather than it being just a normal response to extreme events. Very briefly, I want to mention complex PTSD, which relates to traumatic stress that is repeated and ongoing rather than a single event. Usually that's applied to things like childhood maltreatment, but there may be an argument actually to say that the constant exposure to death after death in terms of COVID could constitute complex PTSD, but there's no research on that yet. Moving on briefly, secondary traumatic stress looks pretty much the same as traumatic stress, but the source of the trauma is secondhand. And this is usually associated with people being exposed to other people's trauma. So things like through a work role, like maybe being a rape counsellor or foster carers. So that's all of the trauma concepts. There's a lot of research around what predicts whether somebody copes better or worse with these kinds of stress responses. And that's where Nerea and Kate will be talking about some of the support strategies that research has found to be important, but also in Nerea's case, also practice and seeing people day in, day out. I really want to emphasize though, that what helps people cope or thrive isn't the same for everybody. It isn't a one size fits all. And just as COVID has affected some groups in society more harshly than others because of inequalities, there are very likely personal or cultural differences in what makes different people resilient. Briefly, burnout is the last concept. So burnout, we can add to this cocktail of possible effects on people's well-being at work. It's not trauma-related, it's work-related exhaustion. It can build up over time for various reasons, some of which are highlighted in the slide. I would say that from my own research, the point of view of burnout being important is that your coping capacity, your resilience to stress may be affected by being already burnt out when you experience the traumatic stressors. So whether or not it becomes a problem or PTSD, or it's just your normal response and then you just cope with it, may be affected by things like compassion fatigue and burnout, and Kate will deal with compassion fatigue. So while I've been talking, Nerea's been keeping an eye on the chat, I think, and we wanted to put a question to you, but Nerea, I'm sure, will be able to just give us a brief highlight of what people have been saying. Did you recognise this? Is this something that's been affecting you or the people around you or the people that you support? Nerea?
I'm waiting for people to write. Yeah, some people, they say yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Secondary traumatic stress from people witnessing the COVID patients struggling to breathe, or even their families having to deal with them, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I felt when I was listening to my nurse friends, is that some of these concepts could be helpful. I think when you're feeling these things, it can feel really odd if you haven't had this experience before. So to be able to say, oh yeah, that's a thing, researchers know about that, I'm normal, I think is just really important. So that's why I'm here today. Thank you for your responses. Yeah.
Everybody's saying yes, that is very common. Nurses working in community settings, it's overwhelming, specialist. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's hope that the rest of our presentation can offer some thoughts that will help.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kay. So my case study on Annie is actually based on the findings from my Masters in Research study that I conducted back in 2015, 2016, and it looked at compassion fatigue and self-compassion in acute care medical nurses. And so what my case study, it sort of is looking at the common presenting features. So some of the common experiences that people, the participants had with compassion fatigue. So Annie is actually a 25-year-old nurse, and she has been a nurse for about 3 years, but in the past few months, she's really been struggling to keep on top of her emotions. She feels overstretched and overwhelmed with her work, and she's also frustrated by some of the patients monopolising her time and keeping her away from other patients. So she feels like the high standard of care that she wants to give is compromised. She feels agitated and hyper alert to everything, and she also has this sinking feeling after time away from the ward. So this Sunday blues like I experienced. At home, she's irritable and can't switch off, and at night time she has intrusive dreams, and subsequently when she returns to work, she doesn't feel refreshed and feels tired. Sadly, she has self-critical and judgmental thoughts, thinking that she's not done her best at work and that she should have done better. Her behaviour linked to coping with her emotional feelings and cognitions are consciously self-protective and largely avoidant. And she also displays checking behaviours as she telephones the ward once she gets home to ensure she hasn't forgotten to do something. The next slide, so I'm just going to have to open up another page here, actually looks at some of the contributing factors. Again, these are from the study. So these were some of the common factors that I found contributed towards the nurses developing compassion fatigue. So in Annie's case, she felt that her very high standards of how she wants to give patient care are in conflict with her actual ability to meet these ideals, which she finds both frustrating and stressful. She finds that her unsupportive ward manager has contributed, unfortunately, to this distress, as she feels undervalued and sad and upset when her manager ignores the concerns she reports. She feels that poor management affects the mood and morale of those working on the ward. She can see how it would be useful to debrief during a shift, but unfortunately, the opportunity is difficult to obtain, and she feels it's particularly detrimental to newly qualified nurses, so those who are early in their career, again, like myself. And she believes her work to be target and protocol driven, which she finds dehumanizing and hinders individual patient care. She reports that poor patient behaviour causes her distress and that she's taken for granted, unfortunately, by some patients and their families who have unrealistic expectations. So I don't know whether any of these sort of factors and feelings and sort of presenting features ring any bells, something that anyone else out there has experienced. So let's now actually look at the definition of compassion fatigue. Well, compassion fatigue is actually defined as an overexposure to suffering and pain that can cause both personal stress and a reduced ability to show empathy. And it occurs from a wish to relieve suffering. When the compassionate energy is used by healthcare professionals to care for patients exceeds their restorative processes, recovery power can be lost, and unfortunately, compassion fatigue follows on. It's actually progressive and cumulative in nature, moving from discomfort to stress and finally to fatigue. Although it can be sudden in its onset, once it's actually recognised, the recovery rate is actually faster than burnout. The effects of compassion fatigue are multifaceted, as Annie's case study displays. Symptoms can include intrusive thoughts, avoidance, sleep disturbances, depression, and of course a loss of compassion. But it also takes its toll on the actual workplace itself and causes more sick days, a higher turnover, increase in mistakes, and unfortunately patient dissatisfaction. in order to self-manage the emotional and physical symptoms of compassion fatigue, the worry is that people may adopt ineffective coping strategies such as avoidance and emotional numbing, which then can have a negative impact on the quality of care a patient receives. So now let's have a little look at some strategies to buffer the impact of caring. We'll look at these both on an individual and organisational level. And we will start with Nerea, who will look at them on an individual level. But before then, if we could just have a look at this question here. So if you could add any thoughts in the chat box on what strategies do you use personally to maintain your well-being? That would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I was going to invite people, if you have a piece of paper or a pen, and think and reflect about this question while I go through the slides that I'm going to be presenting now, that would be great. So go for it.
Okay.
I give you 10 seconds and then we will start. But it would be great if you could take this time to think about what the strategies you are using to cope with the current situation or with difficult situations overall. And let's take it at a look. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is not a protocol, it's not something that you have to follow and suddenly you are going to be the happiest person in the world. These kind of things, they don't work in that way. We wish to be able to provide you with that and then, you know, click the hands, and that we wouldn't be in this situation because it's been really difficult for everybody. So what I'm going to be explaining is things that I have been learning from my clients, from the families that I have been working with, my colleagues, the different services that I have been working with, even different professionals. I'm very curious and I try to ask everybody. So I hope that this is helpful for you. It might be work for you, it might not. Just give it a go and apply it into the best that is helpful for you. You don't need to follow step by step, just try your best. So before I start and saying the steps, there are two ideas that have been in my mind since I started to prepare this webinar. Please, Kate, could you pass the slide? The first, and I guess that you would be quite familiar with this, is the mask, the oxygen mask in the planes. They are always telling us that we have to put the oxygen mask in ourselves first in order to help the others. Because if we run out of oxygen, we are not going to be able to support others. And it's the same in our field. When we are helping the others, sometimes we forget about taking care of ourselves, and we might end up burnout or stressed or being unable to cope with everything around. So it's very important that we are aware of all of this. The other day I was with a couple of colleagues and they were saying, you know, my main coping skill is help others because it brings me satisfaction. And then I asked them, okay, and what happens when you don't have energy and on top of all of this, you have personal problems? How do you deal with that? It's like, well, sometimes I have to ask for sick days and be at home and just be sleeping and try not to contact with anyone else. So let's try to prevent all of this. Next slide, please, Kate. And the second idea, before presenting the steps that we were thinking together, it's one size does not fit all. What I'm trying to say is that some strategies that might help you, it might not help other people. So just check the ones that might be helpful for you or might be useful for you. And in the same way that there are different kind of foods, different colors, different sizes of shoes, and each of us, we are different and we are the experts of our own life, and we know better what works for us. Next, please. So the first step when we are talking about the self-care, it's identify your coping skills. And they can be physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, whatever. For some people, it works their routine. So some people, they might do the same things every day. So the most of my colleagues, if they have to work from home, they get up, they go for a walk around, and then they prepare everything and they sit and they start to work. And they have the same hours to go for lunch, the same hours to do breaks, the same hours to finish, no matter what happens. And some people at work, they have similar routines when they have to go to the office or when they have to go to different mental health centers or whatever, and that works for them. But there are other people that they prefer to sleep more and then sit in the chair later on, or maybe try different things along the day. And that's fine. As long as it works for you, that's what matters. The reason that I put the Maslow pyramid there is just to bring you some ideas that what it might be helpful for you. But the first step, it will be just identify them. Next slide. This might be obvious, but separate work from personal life. And it doesn't matter if you are working from home or if you are working in a COVID setting or in any other setting that you have to go to work. And it's very important that we have a separate space for when we are working than when we are having personal life. Here you cannot see it, but I have a folding table, and when my work finishes, just I bend it and I put it aside because I don't want to be thinking about that constant reminder. Or when I'm going to work, that's perfect. It's a different setting. I go with the bike or I go walking and I can separate that. Those people that they are working in a setting that they have to go to work, I would really encourage you that if some relatives, friends, whoever is contacting you to check you, how many COVID cases have you been checking today? What has been happening at work? And you don't want to talk about it. That's perfectly fine. That's okay. You can say, just I don't want to continue talking about work when I go out, because we need to set the boundaries. We need to protect ourselves. And as you can see in the images, they are very similar. We need to separate that. Our work and our personal life has become so enmeshed that we need to separate that in order to step back and take care of ourselves. Next slide, please. Be curious. And when I say be curious is when we imagine that you are growing up and you are like a child and you are seeing the world with different eyes. Because sometimes we run out of coping strategies. We don't know what else to do. There are some things that, some days that nothing works. And sorry, Kay, I'm going to use you as an example. So we were talking yesterday and one of us, we were having a bad day, and it happens to all of us at some point. So I really appreciate Kay and Kate being here. And it's just nothing works. Nothing that we have been trying is working. So sometimes just go to Google, check around. My niece, for example, give me brilliant ideas. One of my colleagues was telling me examples about her daughter, telling him different strategies that he could use. You never know from where different ideas is going to be helpful for you. So check around, be curious, and try different things. You might be surprised that you have developed skills that you didn't even know that you had. So why not? The fourth point, it would be attitude. And there are a couple of things that I will mention that is not in the slides. I'm more of a fan of improvisation instead of reading everything. So if you might notice some thing, just bear with me, okay? And when I mention attitude, is be positive. And I know that nowadays it's really difficult, but there are many positive things around. Today is sunny. All of you were sharing in the chat that you have different sunny things around or sunny places in Cornwall, up in Scotland, whatever. That's for me, I'm like a plant. That's a reason to be happy. So that makes me happy, and be positive. Nowadays, when we are happy, we provide way better care to our clients or our patients. We develop better relationship. We engage more with others. We provide a different experience that when we are moody, that when we are having a difficult time, etc. If you're having difficult times to remember what kind of things make you happy or positive things, I will invite you to try a gift that a friend recommended me some years ago. I will invite you to write in a piece of paper different positive things that depend on you, that happen to you during the day. Maybe someone smiled at you, maybe someone tells you something nice, maybe you hug a tree and it felt nice. I don't know. But write in a piece of paper things that make you happy, that brought you any kind of joy, and put it in a jar. When you're having a difficult time, you can go there. Or at the end of the day, you're having difficult days, just go there and read them. You might have a different experience. It might change your day. I don't know. It might work for you, it might not, but some people, they seem to have a positive experience with that. Next step, it will be self-acceptance. All of us, we are in the same boat. We are in the same situation, and we cannot do anything about it. The only thing is that we can contribute. This is like the small drops of water in the sea. We're not going to change the sea, but a small drop counts. We are trying our best. We are working in our best, and we cannot change the pandemic, but we are improving it step by step by doing the work that we are doing. So let's take care of ourselves in order to be able to provide care for others. And something very important, do it with self-compassion. And maybe I should have mentioned this early on because it should cover the whole presentation. The care, could you pass the slide, please, Kate? What means self-compassion? The warmth, the care, the concern, the everything that we put for our clients, put that for ourselves in the way that works for you. It might be self-talk, like you are great, you are amazing, you are doing an amazing job. If we don't say those things to ourselves, nobody's going to come to tell us. Sometimes we are our worst enemy, and we need to change that. If we are working, if we are trying our best, that's everything that we can do. How can we be self-compassion to ourselves? Be kind. Don't be your own enemy. We commit mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Look at my pronunciation here. Come on, you have to get some words. Nobody's perfect, and it's okay. It doesn't matter. Just be kind to yourself. Do it mindfulness. Do it mindfully, which means is that put things in perspective. Try that negative thoughts, they are not in your mind all the time, because it's going to reach nowhere. When you go to sleep, you go to sleep with your own brain. It doesn't matter if you're sleeping with someone else or not. Your head is with yourself. And if you're having a good or a bad moment, it's you who is going to suffer it or enjoy it. And then common humanity. All of us, we are in all of this together. And sometimes dealing with things as a team, sharing the burden, might be more useful than just taking everything on board and end up burnout or with stress or whatever. Next slide, please. And before introducing the following step, which it will be the fifth, I will encourage you to think about that we are not an island. We belong to so many layers, and I guess that this is where my systemic thinking comes from. Well, no, influence me, sorry. So we belong to a family, a group of friends, a group of colleagues, a service, a culture, a society, a community, whatever. We are not alone, and we are social animals. We need to connect, which is the next step. Please, Kate. And for whatever reason, it does not, oh yeah, here. Connect with others. And when I say connect, I will say not only at a personal level, as well at work. At a personal level, and I have to say that I am very lucky, and I hope that all of you are lucky as well, in the sense that you can have people that you can count on. And I think about my relationships and the people that surround me and my connections as a spider net, or maybe a trampoline with knots. When I'm about to fall, I know that if I fall, they are going to push me back again where I am, and that's the reason that I'm here. And that I am having a good mood, because I have an amazing back support thanks to those connections. And maybe I cannot see them face to face. Maybe I could not go to Spain in Christmas, and that's okay, because they were there for me. So I will encourage you to connect, whatever way it looks like. Maybe organize a Zoom call and cook together with your relatives or with a friend, or go for a walk, or I don't know, the other day in the supermarket, maybe this was not the most COVID-safe thing, but apparently one of the girls of the counter remembered me, because one day I told her thank you, because she's also a key worker, and if I wouldn't be able to go to the supermarket and buy food, trust me, I would be really grumpy. I need to eat, and I love food. So I said like 1 month ago, thank you to her, and she remembered me, and then she started to talk to me and engage with me, and it was the highlight of my day. So try to connect with the kind of things that surround you. Maybe smile at someone in the park, or, well, you might find some creepy people sometimes, but we are human. We are humans. We need to connect. And when I say at work, or even in a personal level, when you are doing something, engage with that. If you're watching TV, watch TV. If you are watching a series or a movie, do it. Don't be with the mobile at the same time with the TV, or talking to someone at the same time that you are with the mobile talking with someone else. We are overloading our brain, and we are not allowing ourselves to rest. And we are saying to the brain, let's keep working all the time. So one thing at a time, because maybe we have a different experience. If we try one thing at a time, we have enough negative things around nowadays to be focusing in tons way more. Okay. And one thing that I have to add here, just I was surprised the other day, I was talking with one of my colleagues at work, is just, I am not able to share when I'm having a bad day. Why not? Why don't we go around and ask other people, say, how are you doing? How's your day going? It's like, it's been horrible. And then I explain what's the reason why it's in that way. I don't overload the information and I don't dwell on it. But it's just, well, it's been difficult because of this. Maybe the other person can give you a different perspective. Maybe they can blink the eye and change the attitude that we are having towards that. But share with others and be open that others share with you as well. That's very important. Next slide, please. Evaluate your options. And I'm not going to be entering details because I have heard so many examples. Just when you think about your coping skills, think in terms of health, short, medium, and long-term effects in your health. What kind of things are going to be positive and what kind of things maybe they are not going to be as positive, and then take it from them. Okay? Next slides, the next couple of slides, they are examples about things that you can do at work based on self-care. You can do mindfulness, plan ahead, organize, talk to colleagues, engage in conversation, communicate, be social. And if you don't want to be social, it's also okay. But the reason that the slides in at work, and pass the next one, please, Kate, and at personal life are similar is because, for example, we can do mindfulness at work. I have been doing mindfulness with my colleagues since March, and it has provided such a different experience. And check with them when we are doing mindfulness before, how is your day going? Just, there is no different roles, there are not power issues, there is nothing, we're at the same level there. It's like, and talk openly. And then we do mindfulness, and it's 15 minutes of space, 20 minutes of space, that is more than worth it. Because when we come back to work, we are way more productive. We are way more organized. We prioritize things better instead of having negative thoughts and so on. Maybe it works for you, maybe not. Again, give it a go. Maybe you can take the chance to learn new things or develop new skills. You never know. Maybe you surprise yourself doing something that you didn't expect. Apparently, I know how to draw better than I expected, and I was surprised. So that's also a positive thing. Move forward, please, Kate. 7 point, and we are close to the end of this part, is work on it, prioritize, and organize it. Maybe at the end of the week, just sit with it on Sunday and think in terms of a diary or timetable and prioritize the times and the things that you are going to be doing for yourself. Maybe even the real system or whatever system that you are using, you have to book yourself as if you will be a client in order to take care of yourself. You have to prioritize yourself. It's true that the service can provide different kind of support. It can provide different resources, but this is a self-responsibility. The service can provide things, but we also need to engage with that and prioritize ourselves. Because otherwise, we are not going to be able to be as productive and caring and amazing professionals as all of us we are when we are working. Whatever organization means for you, maybe just this organization is the organization for you, and that's okay. Okay, next step. And final, just sit with it at the end of the week or whenever you feel that's appropriate. Check it, evaluate it, and replace it if needed. So for example, I used to go to work in bike. Now I cannot. It's cold, it's raining, it wouldn't be safe for me. And it was an amazing coping mechanism for me, going with the bike around. Now I have to change it and try different things. Maybe in the past, it helped me to do exercise every day or go for a run. And now I cannot do it because I'm having injuries or for whatever reason. Whatever you have to replace it, it's okay. If you are taking piano lessons, maybe you committed to that. And although you committed to that, you don't need to continue it if it's not working anymore. Just change it. We are human. It's okay. And finally, to sum up all of this, everything that I have been mentioning is, first, identify your needs, whatever it is. Second, separate work from personal life. Third, be curious, explore around like Dora the Explorer, or like being a child, ask old people, ask children. They might give you some ideas that they are really interesting that you can try. Attitude, try to be positive. And also something really important that I think that I mentioned, I'm not sure, say no. When you cannot cope with more, when you cannot deal with everything that they are asking you, say no, and it's okay. We need to set boundaries, we really need them. There is an example that I would really like to share this. I used to work with a young person in the past, and he was living in a very deprived situation and couldn't go out of his room for different reasons. And when he was angry, he decided to change that attitude. He used to self-harm. when he was angry because he didn't have any other coping mechanism. And one day he discovered that if he looked himself in the mirror, he had such a face that he laughed at himself. So I couldn't believe it. So he developed a completely different attitude towards when he was angry and he couldn't cope with himself. He looked at himself at the mirror and laughed at himself. Maybe sometimes we need to try those kind of things from a different point of view, you know? Connect with others, but also connect with whatever you are doing, work, activities, or whatever. It might bring you a different experience. Evaluate your options, work on it, plan ahead if it works for you, and reflect, reevaluate, and change it if it's not working. You don't need to continue doing it. It's for yourself and nobody else. So, any question, anything? We will come back to that at the end. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Nerea. Thank you very much. I will now look at some strategies that can help support healthcare staff on an organisational level. But before we do that, I've just got another question, question 3. So feel free to comment in the chat. So are any of these strategies present in your workplace? So I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts on that are. So let's now have a look at some of the strategies on an organisational level, and we'll start with peer-to-peer support. So there's actually a lot of evidence that suggests that work colleagues can often offer the best support to one another when times are difficult. So with peer-to-peer support, one of the first things that we could do for one another is actually know how to recognise the signs and symptoms of something like compassion fatigue, burnout, secondary traumatic stress, and when someone's suffering from them. So some of these signs and symptoms for these concepts were actually highlighted in the case studies of Annie and Gina. So by knowing what burnout and compassion fatigue look like, we can identify work colleagues who maybe need some extra support, not only from their peers, but also from professionals. So being aware and recognising concepts like compassion fatigue and burnout in those around us can also help to normalise them. We need to remember that once someone realises that that the way they are feeling is normal, they are more willing to talk to someone about their struggles and also to accept help. Peer-to-peer support can also help to keep us stay connected, as Nerea mentioned, common humanity, knowing that others are feeling the same, and knowing that it's actually okay not to feel okay, and to get the opportunities to talk to one another about it in an open manner. And another way that as peers we can help support one another is self-care buddies. So you can buddy up with someone, as an example, and just check in with one another, see how each other is doing, just give each other a text, see how each other's stress levels are, whether you are both self-caring, are you taking your breaks, are you having something to eat and drink, and keep hydrated during your shift at work. I'll now look at team support. And again, more research has actually shown how good teamwork is associated with lower levels of errors, stress, injury, sickness, absence, and the list goes on. So as team members, we need to think of ways that we can support one another and that create within our work environment a favourable social climate. In turn, this will have a positive effect on our mental health and levels of job satisfaction for all individual team members. And ultimately, obviously, if we're happy, our patients are happy. So what would some of these ways to support one another include? Well, they could include team mid and end shift clusters to check in on one another's well-being, where you can be active, open listeners with one another. You can also provide a warm welcome. So especially at the moment where we're finding members of staff being redeployed onto different wards and units that they're not used to, it would be really lovely if we just make sure that we give these temporary staff and new staff a warm welcome where they feel safe and valued. Another way is to provide team support is making sure as a team, we have accessible, comfortable space to have protected breaks. This certainly came out in my research, was that staff weren't getting this, and how people could possibly feel that they're going to be able to give patient care on having nothing to eat or drink all shift. I don't know how anyone could cope with that. But lastly, we also we shouldn't forget that to include support staff in all this. So as a team, it's not just about the doctors and the nurses and the physios, but it's also about the domestics and the caterers. So manager and organisational leader support. Well, this is pivotal to all the ways you can do this, which are outlined on the right-hand side of the slide. And it's demonstrating that you care, value, and appreciate your staff. Recognition really goes a long way. And certainly, again, I know I keep going back to my piece of research, but one of the things that the participants felt was lacking was this sense of feeling valued and appreciated, which they actually found upsetting and distressing. So feeling not appreciated and undervalued can actually cause more upset and stress in healthcare staff than the demands of the job sometimes. But what's really important is that we find a way of doing this in a meaningful way, in an authentic way. And the basic terms, it needs to create that good, warm feeling. However, showing your appreciation on an individual or team can be tricky at times. So I do appreciate that, because the way a manager perceives is a nice way of acknowledging efforts and a job well done might not be perceived in the same light by the recipient. So unfortunately, at times, this can actually cause more harm than good. So it's really important to actually know your receiver, so they to try and prevent this from happening. But as managers, you also need to remember to look after your own well-being. You can't look after others in your team without looking after yourself as well. So if you do feel that you are finding it difficult, then it's really important to seek support yourself. So I'd like to now move on to compassionate, authentic leadership, and look at how it looks in practice and why it's important. So why is it important? Well, it's what we have to remember is that compassion is a core cultural value of the NHS. So in order to nurture a culture of compassion, organisations need leaders as carriers of culture to embody compassion in their leadership. So to lead by example, we need leaders who recognise that in authentically caring for their healthcare workforce, in return, they get a workforce that delivers thoughtful and compassionate care for patients, which is ultimately what organisations want to achieve, as it results in better patient outcomes and satisfied patients. So having a compassionate work environment can have a positive impact on a number of things, from the health and well-being and creativity and motivation of staff who work in them to fewer sick days. And people wanting to leave their jobs, which obviously is very difficult at the moment with so many staff shortages, and many healthcare professionals wanting to leave their profession. So how can one achieve compassionate, authentic leadership? Well, there are a number of ways of doing this, and we need someone who attends to their workforce by actively listening. And you need to find out what the main challenges of your workforce are facing. And it's really important to do this in a non-judgmental manner. It also involves enabling and empowering your staff to understand what these challenges are and working in a collaborative way, and to help them understand what the challenges are. They're more likely to be able to come up with some solutions. Thirdly, it involves empathy, which has been shown to help increase staff commitment and motivation and creates a more positive emotional working environment. And it's really important to encourage your staff to share their thoughts and ideas, so they feel that their voices are listened to. Again, going back to my research, one of the things that upset the participants was that although they voiced their concern, they didn't feel that their concerns were then acted upon. So nothing changed, and everything stayed the same. And again, going back to what Nerea was saying, we need to have moments where we share our thoughts and challenges. So there's this sense of common humanity. And one of the strategies that could be used to facilitate this is Schwartz rounds. And obviously that's a bit tricky at the moment, but something to think about for the future. And finally, helping. This involves considered and thoughtful action, and that includes engaging staff rather than just telling them what to do. But what's also important is to remember is that a helping leader not only finds the time and resources for change and improvement, but also removes the barriers that hinder those changes, and allows strategies to actually be implemented and used. So, question 4, well, I just quickly grab some water. So to you, what does compassionate, authentic leadership look like in practice? I'd be really interested to know if you feel like that's what you are receiving at the moment, or ways that you would like to see improvements in it. So if you could share that, that would be marvellous. So are there anything out there, Kate, to discuss at this point? Any chats?
Just unmuting myself. There's been really active participation in the chat, so it's really hard to go back over everything. Lots of people talking about what they are providing within their own organisations or have been provided. There's obviously quite a bit of attention to it. I think one of the things that jumps out to me is that it needs to be represented by managers. I think there's a little bit of a sense of that in there, and that for some people the support needs to come from colleagues more than taking it home. Those are some of the things that have jumped out to me. Lots more messages have appeared. Let me just check. Interesting. Leadership visibility is very important. Concerns not acted upon, hitting home, top-down environment. Yeah. There's a lot of agreement with what you've been saying, basically. And just for everybody's benefit, we will actually keep the chat, and we'll be reading through that later to understand what some of the main issues are. So we will try to capture what people's main concerns are. I'm going to mute myself again.
Thank you, Kay. So I just had a bit of a coughing fit. Took a gulp of water too quickly. Right. Any more comments to add there? From the chat? No. Okay. Okay, we'll now look at thriving at work. So these are the final few slides that I'll be going through. I've actually included this concept because I think it's actually a really useful model and framework that I hope leaders will find useful in giving them some direction on how best to support the health and well-being of their staff, and also their ability to thrive at work. Given the time we've got, I can't go into it in too much depth, but if you would like some more information on it, there's a reference list at the end of the presentation, and also my contact details. So please feel free to get hold of me via email. But I think before we discuss what thriving actually is, I think we need to actually look at what it would look like if we weren't thriving at work. And on reflection, when I think back to how I felt when I was nursing, I think this was basically the problem that led me to eventually leaving, because to me, leaving was the only solution to get over the problem. And basically, when you're not thriving, you feel like you're just going through the motions every day. You're clocking in, you're clocking out, and there's sort of a sense of meaninglessness and almost hopelessness. And probably have managers as well feeling the same, who are clocking in and clocking out and not wanting to rock the boat and keep their heads down. However, if you are thriving at work, you have this great sense of momentum and progress, not necessarily in the context of climbing the career ladder, but you'll have a sense that you're moving forward in your thinking, in the activities you're involved in, and also your mindset. Basically, you're not stagnating. And when you thrive at work, you feel energized and valued and have a sense of connection with others around you, which is so important. You'll also be more willing to learn and grow. And importantly, the opportunities to do this will be there because your organisation will have provided them. So let's have a little look at thriving. So what is it? Well, it's defined actually as a psychological state in which individuals experience both vitality and learning. So in other words, vitality and learning are the essential components of thriving. So vitality signifies a sense of feeling alive, energized, excited, and passionate about your work. And learning involves feeling that you're growing through acquiring new knowledge and skill. However, these need to actually be experienced jointly, not separately, for thriving at work to happen. So if a person is learning but feels overwhelmed and burnt out, they're not thriving. And conversely, if someone feels energized but their learning is stagnant, that person isn't thriving either. So you need basically both vitality and learning to thrive at work. So what is thriving at work based on? Well, it's actually based on two assumptions. Firstly, that simply decreasing stresses does not mean, as an employee, you will be able to thrive. But if enabling resources and conditions, which I'll go into shortly, are present, there is increased probability that as an employee, you'll thrive even under difficult conditions and circumstances, which of course is particularly relevant if you're in a healthcare setting where many are exposed to traumatic and stressful situations on a daily basis. And the second assumption is that although individual characteristics can influence thriving at work, how much thriving potential an employee has actually depends on the organisational context that they work in. So in other words, the organisational culture and climate that surrounds them. So in other words, an employee can be really eager to want to grow and develop, but if the organisational system doesn't allow it, then thriving doesn't happen. So we'll just go on to the benefits. Well, they can be at both an organisational and an individual level. As you can see here, it includes achieving better job performance, lower levels of burnout and more resilient, and also you're less likely to leave your job, which obviously at the moment is incredibly important. And benefits to the individual. Again, satisfied with life, you're more likely to collaborate, thrive at work, all very important things. And my final slide, I won't be able to go into this in too much detail because it's quite complicated, but again, please feel free to get hold of me via email, but it just gives you a visual of what's involved in being able to thrive at work. And it basically requires resources for then behaviours to occur that allow you to then thrive at work. The visual here just gives you a better sort of idea of explaining what the model is. So if individuals are situated in a particular context, they are more or less likely to thrive, and that's why culture and climate of an organisation is so important. And the model also shows that there are 3 sets of factors that contribute to our ability to thrive. And that is thriving at work. But if I just ask this one last question, what do you think is needed to enable you to thrive at work? So think about what you already have at work that enables you to thrive, but also I'd be quite interested to find out what you feel, what you hope for, what you wish for to enable you to thrive at work. And okay, are there any, Nerea, are there any thoughts out there, any questions, any sort of common comments in the chat?
Your response to the question that you just asked is coming in thick and fast: autonomy, equality, trusting relationships, safety and support, debrief and feedback, clear communication, effective use of time, connection and belonging, to not be overwhelmed by the constant change and stress. Sorry?
No, supervision, motivation, encouragement, not micromanaging.
Feeling valued, appreciated. Brilliant.
It's pouring in.
Really thrilled that people are contributing.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's so much information here. It's great.
Yeah, it's nice to know it struck a chord, what we've discussed today. I guess we've just got a final few slides to go through. This particular slide highlights a moral injury conference that has been hosted on the 9th of February. That if you click onto the onto the website here, will give you more information.
The links in the chat.
Yeah, and the links in the chat. Also, we have a resources website that was developed by the Crisis, Disaster and Trauma Committee. And again, the link is here. And we also have our details here if you were wish to contact us about any other questions that you might have, or thoughts or comments. Anything to add there, Kay?
Putting that in the chat. I've been responding to questions as we've gone through, and mostly from my own point of view and my own reading, but there's one question that came up. I clicked the wrong button because I was learning, and that question is, what are your thoughts about compassion fatigue versus empathy fatigue, which I don't think we've addressed. For myself, I think empathy is a big part of compassion fatigue, but I wonder what you would say about that, Kate.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's actually quite difficult to sort of differentiate the two. With compassion fatigue, obviously it's a lack of being able to show that sense of empathy. But the problem is with compassion fatigue, one of the ways that we cope with it is that we avoid, and then of course for patients they think that we're not being caring, but actually compassion fatigue often happens to those that care the most, because they give so much themselves, and their only way sometimes of coping is to distance themselves, which of course then gives the impression to a patient that they're not being not showing empathy. So they're kind of interlinked, really, I would say.
Yeah, agreed. I think I did some research and I was looking at what the predictors of secondary traumatic stress would be, and I was thinking about empathy. Empathy was nowhere in my statistical workup. Actually, self-care and burnout were far more important. So I think there's a lot to do with what resources you have to deal with the stressor, really. Yeah. I don't think empathy in itself puts people at risk. I think not having the capacity to support all of that. Yeah, and someone's just mentioned blocked care. It's the same. There are so many interrelating terms, unfortunately, that seem to be used. Nursing seems to like compassion fatigue and blocked care, but then other sectors might use secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. There are lots of overlapping concepts.
In psychology, we use burnout. I think that's the most common one, being born. Like, yeah, my brain is getting empty or things like that. That's the most common things that I have heard.
So a few people have dropped off now because they've had to go to everything from meetings to homeschooling.
Yes, of course. Well, We've got the Q&A, which obviously, I don't know whether there are any questions, other questions that can be answered at this point, or
if anybody wants to come back to any of the questions that I've tried to answer, there's been some really interesting questions which we'll capture.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to add to that or feel they haven't been answered properly, then please ask now.
Yes.
Well, they can also write us, because it sounds like us now or never. They can.
There's a question for you, Kate, here, which is to do with your thriving model. What are agentic work behaviours?
Well, let's go back to the slide. Well, these are 3 factors, sub-factors, as it were. So task focus, exploration, heedful relating. They are sub-factors of agentic work behaviours. So heedful relating, for instance, is about feeling like you've got connection with others. And task focus is that you are all working together. And exploration, that you are willing to sort of be creative and collaborate and work through problems together. I mean, if I show you here, there's some really good references here that I would advise you to have a look at, and they'll explain it more to you. It's very difficult to explain in just a few minutes, really, because it's quite complicated, and all the there are a lot of components that are interrelated. So I could be here for hours going on about it, which could be quite dry for some people. But these 2 articles are very good at explaining it in more detail when you have time to have a look at them. But again, please drop me an email if you would like to. But it's something that I'm looking into in my PhD, and looking at how there are so many members of staff, well, nurses wanting to leave the nursing profession, and particularly those who are newly qualified or early career nurses. So I'm going to look at how thriving at work can best prevent that from happening, really. What facilities allow someone to thrive at work and hopefully then remain in their job for their whole career would be preferable. So we've got these, also we've got these other links as well, some pieces that I've written in the past. We've got Kay's article here along with my study as well. So please feel free to have a look at those. Any more comments or thoughts that we need to address now, Kay or Nerea?
There are some really nice comments come in. I think one really important one is someone said, you know, leaders, managers are people too, and they are also struggling. And
absolutely,
we all recognise that as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of nice comments coming in. I'm just trying to sift through this, so much going, oh yeah, this is another one. It's hard to feel valued and appreciated when I've been working from home for almost a year. Yeah, we're feeling that too with you. It's quite tough when you're separated from your team and you just, work is across the landing or whatever in the spare bedroom if you're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I would also like to mention about Twitter that we will check Twitter later on. We haven't been checking it, so just in case if anyone said anything there, that's the reason that we will check it later.
Mm-hmm. There's a question addressed to you, Nerea.
And I asked Ian, what does he mean? So there is a question that says,
okay, it's gone.
1 second, I'm coming back to it. I'm really unfamiliar with this. I'm learning as well. What is it? He was asking about if there is certain prone profile. Nerea, do you think that a certain profile exists for someone that is more prone to compassionate fatigue? I don't know what you mean about certain profile, Ian. I guess that there are. I know, but I guess that there are people that they might be more sensitive than other people, depending on the kind of things that we have been exposed. My experience, it also depends on the kind of things that we allow that it influence us. So, for example, I have friends that they are, or colleagues that they are very resilient, and then they have been so immersed watching news and bombarded by so many negative things that COVID situation is affecting them way more. Compassionate fatigue is affecting them way more. So it's like they are building up so many negative input, stimulus constantly. Media when they are at home, negative things when they are at work. So I wouldn't say that there is a specific profile. Having into account and observing everything that has been passing the past year that has been happening, I would say that it depends on the kind of things that we allowed to enter in our life. And that's the reason that in the same way that it's important to connect, it's also very important to disconnect and check what are our limits. And of course, there can be some personal situations that might be affecting at the same time. Just if you're having problems at home and at the same time problems at work, and maybe your managers of the service is not so supportive and you are being redeployed, it's a build-up that makes you more vulnerable to burnout, compassionate fatigue. If we have different positive things in our life, it can help us to buffer it. But if everything is negative, it's going to affect that person way more. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
And I think we really have to acknowledge that in the circumstances that we are in, it's really difficult to get back to those things that we know make us well. I know that I struggle with that. Currently I don't have a local friend that I can go for a walk with. So I have to break the law to meet a friend. So I haven't been, and I know that affects me. And for people who are dealing with all of this at work, they're still going to work, but when they come home, they're still dealing with what all the rest of us are, a global pandemic and all the limitations that has on our capacity to support ourselves. And it's tough.
No, absolutely. Now, I'm just looking at the chat, some interesting comments. Very interesting. Well, I think the time is nearly past. I'm sure people have very busy lives and have things to get back to. So on behalf of us all here today and the BPS and the Crisis, Disaster and Trauma Committee, and also to Adele in the background, and all the other members of the events team at the BPS, I'd like to thank you. And also, I would very much like to thank you, the audience, for being here today, because without you, this wouldn't be happening. And we just hope that we've helped in some small way, and that you found something from this session that is going to be of help to you. And like we've said, if you want to contact us about any other thoughts that come to your mind after the session is finished, feel free to get hold of us on the emails. I believe that the PowerPoint is actually going to be posted to those who attended today, along with the recording. So you'll be able to get hold of our details if you haven't been able to scribble them down.
And Adele has put a link to evaluation of the webinar. So I imagine that will be sent to people as well with all of those resources. But it's very helpful for us. We'll be working our way through the chat to try and figure out what else the Crisis, Disaster and Trauma team can do to support people. We haven't done that many public ones like this. We usually are supporting psychologists, but we will be looking to see if there's anything else that we can do.
Absolutely. So thank you and cheerio. Take care.